Welcome back to Kindness in Real Life. Today, we got a story that'll warm your soul. James Sullivan, a steely CEO, and Sophie Harper, a single mom fighting for a kid, get tangled up when a wild storm strands them together. It's all grit, heart, and a love that sneaks up fast. A month after the storm, James is barking orders at a dusty project site when Sophie walks in, dropping papers, smirking. Guess I can't escape you, huh? Wait, she's working for him now? How'd she go from spilling water on his fancy shoes to this? Hit that like button. Let's get 39 likes to spread this kindness vibe. And I'd love if you want to. Let's jump into this rainy ride. The plane's engines roared, a deep rumble that shook the cabin as wind howled outside, clawing at the wings. Inside first class, James Sullivan sat rigid in the frontmost seat, his fair skin shadowed by a day's stubble, sharp blue eyes fixed on the iPad glowing in his lap. His dark gray suit, Armani, crisp despite the long flight, hugged him like armor, tie loosened just enough to breathe. A whiskey glass sat on his tray, amber liquid sloshing faintly with each jolt, his fingers curled around it tight. The screen showed a map, his latest project, a $1 million resort sprawling across a coastal town's edge. Sullivan Ventures owned half the skyline from London to New York, and James ran it all, a machine of cold precision. Time was money, and he didn't waste either. Not since his wife and son were ripped away 5 years ago, leaving nothing but ash and a heart turned to ice. The intercom crackled, cutting through the storm's growl. Ladies and gentlemen, due to an unexpected Category 10 storm, we're making an emergency landing at the nearest airport. Please remain calm and follow instructions. James didn't flinch, his jaw tightening as he muttered, "Emergency landing? I don't have time for this crap." His voice was low, edged with frost, the kind that silenced boardrooms. He didn't look up, didn't need to. Storms were just noise. He'd handle it, like always, swift and emotionless. Back in economy, Sophie Harper gripped her worn backpack, knuckles pale against her warm brown skin, dark curls plastered to her neck from nervous sweat. Her thin jacket, secondhand, frayed at the cuffs, clung to her, damp from the plane's humid air. She wore faded jeans and sneakers with soles peeling at the edges, practical for the grind of her life. The plane lurched, a violent shake that made her stomach drop, and her brown eyes darted to the window, pitch black, lightning slashing the sky like a jagged scar. She bit her lip, whispering, "Noah's okay. He's with Mrs. Clara. Just get through this." Her son's face, 6 years old, all gap-toothed grins, flashed in her mind, steadying her. This flight wasn't her choice. A delivery gig promised double pay if she finished by the weekend. She'd left Noah with their neighbor, but now, with the plane bucking like it might crack, she cursed herself. "I shouldn't have taken this damn job." The tires screeched against the runway, a piercing grind as the plane jolted to a stop, whiskey splashing across James's sleeve. He swore under his breath, wiping it with a napkin, blue eyes blazing as he glanced out. The airport was a speck, one crumbling terminal, no tower, rain drowning it in a white curtain. The intercom buzzed again. "All flights are canceled until further notice. Please seek safe shelter." James stood, grabbed his sleek suitcase, and strode off the plane, rain pelting his face like needles. He didn't flinch, storms didn't faze him, people didn't either. He dialed his driver, signal flickering, the voice crackling through. "Roads are flooded, sir. I can't get there." James growled, "Useless," and snapped the phone shut, turning to a trembling airport worker. "Nearest hotel?" The kid pointed, voice shaky. 2 blocks. Rest Haven Inn. Might be full." Sophie stepped off behind him, jacket soaked in seconds, backpack slung uneven over one shoulder. Rain plastered her curls flat, sneakers squelching as she clutched her bag tighter. No driver, no plan, just a need to get back to Noah. She overheard the worker, hurrying the same way James strode, unaware their paths aligned. The storm roared, wind snapping trees along the road, water surging over sidewalks like a river gone wild. James moved fast, suit bedraggled, shoes gleaming wet but his pace unrelenting. He wanted out of this nowhere town. Sophie ran behind, breath hitching, her thin jacket no match for the downpour, eyes fixed ahead on survival. They hit Rest Haven Inn at the same time, a weather building, neon sign flickering Rest Haven in pink and green, paint peeling but the windows clean. Damp would scented the air as James shoved the door open, his voice slicing through the hum. "Give me a room. Now." The innkeeper, a middle-aged woman with a messy bun, apron stained, looked him up and down, then glanced at Sophie dripping in the doorway. "One room left," she rasped, eyeing them both. "Double bed, small sofa. You're sharing. Nobody's moving in this storm." James turned, locking eyes with Sophie for the first time. Her brown skin glistened wet, jacket clinging, brown eyes bright despite the exhaustion. He frowned, sharp and cold. "I'm not sharing with her." Sophie wiped rain from her face, panting, and shot back. "I don't want to be here with you either, but the storm doesn't care who you are." Her bluntness cut through, a spark against his ice, and he paused, blue eyes narrowing. The innkeeper shrugged. "No other way. Power's spotty, streets flooded. Take it or sleep outside." Thunder crashed, rattling the windows, underscoring her point. James gritted his teeth, tossing his credit card on the counter with a flick. "Fine. I'm taking the bed." Sophie's jaw tightened, ready to argue, but Noah's face flashed again. She needed a dry spot, not a fight. "Whatever," she muttered, following him in. The room was a shoebox, double bed with a frayed blanket, faded sofa sagging in the corner, a rickety table under a blinking ceiling light. James dropped his suitcase, sinking onto the sofa, his gaze sweeping the space with disdain. "I'm not staying in this dump with you." Sophie set her backpack down, peeling off her soaked jacket, voice steady despite the chill. "Dump or not, it beats drowning out there. And your fancy suit doesn't scare me. I'm a single mom." He turned, blue eyes flickering as he studied her. Wet curls, unflinching stare, a strength he didn't expect. "You talk too much," he huffed, but when wind slammed the window, glass trembling, he fell silent, stuck with her in this absurd night. Sophie sat on the floor, pulling her phone from her bag, fingers shaking as she dialed Mrs. Clara. "Is Noah okay? I can't get back tonight." The signal crackled, Clara's voice faint. "He's fine, hon. Storm's bad. Stay safe." Sophie exhaled, relief softening her face, but worry lingered. James opened his suitcase, laptop gleaming under the dim light, battery low, no signal. He snapped it shut, leaning back, rain pounding the roof like war drums. The room sank into tense quiet. Him in his rumpled suit, her drenched and weary, two strangers bound by a storm neither wanted. She glanced at him, his icy stare fixed on the wall, and broke the silence. "You always this charming, or is it just the weather?" He smirked, faint and cold, blue eyes flicking to her. "I don't waste charm on strangers." Sophie snorted, wringing out her jacket. "Lucky me." Thunder rolled again, lights flickering, and the absurdity settled in. They were here, together, whether they liked it or not. James leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. 5 years of loss had honed him into steel, but her voice, sharp, alive, pricked something he didn't name. Sophie hugged her knees, thinking of Noah, praying the storm would break. Neither knew it yet, but fate had just locked them in tighter than the rain-soaked walls around them. Rain hammered the Rest Haven Inn, a relentless roar against the thin roof, wind rattling the windows like it wanted to rip them loose. Inside the cramped room, the lone oil lamp flickered on the rickety table, its tiny flame dancing wild, casting jagged shadows across the peeling walls. James Sullivan sat on the sagging sofa, his fair skin tinged orange in the dim glow, sharp blue eyes staring into the void. His Armani suit, once pristine, hung damp and wrinkled, tie discarded, shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows. The whiskey stain on his cuff had dried to a faint smear, a mark he ignored. His laptop sat useless beside him, battery dead, signal gone. A millionaire CEO reduced to sitting in a dump, no control, no power. He crossed his arms, jaw tight, trying to will the storm into submission. Sophie Harper knelt on the cold wooden floor, her warm brown skin catching the lamp's faint light, dark curls dripping wet onto her faded jeans. Her thin jacket hung over the bedpost, useless and soaked, leaving her in a worn gray t-shirt that clung to her damp shoulders. She pressed her phone to her ear, backpack open beside her, voice trembling as she spoke. "Mrs. Clara, can you hear me?" The signal crackled, static slicing through. "No, it's fine, Sophie. Don't worry." A thunderclap boomed, shaking the room, and the phone slipped from her hand, clattering loud against the boards. She snatched it up, muttering, "As long as he's okay. Please, let this end." Her brown eyes flicked to the window, blackness torn by lightning, and she hugged herself, steadying her breath. James glanced over, irritation flashing across his face. "You're too loud," he said, voice low and cold. Cutting through the storm's din, Sophie turned, curls bouncing, her gaze sharp despite the exhaustion. "I'm worried about my son. Got a problem with that." He smirked, faint and icy, blue eyes glinting. "Not my problem." She rolled her eyes, standing to grab a chipped mug of water the innkeeper had left on the table. The room was a cage, bed with its frayed blanket, sofa creaking under James, air thick with damp wood and tension. She didn't see the sofa leg jutting out, her sneaker catching it with a dull thud. The mug tipped, water splashing straight onto James's polished leather shoes. He sprang up, growling. "Do you know how much these cost?" Bespoke from Italy. His blue eyes blazed, outrage sharpening his voice like a blade. Sophie didn't flinch, bending to pick up the mug, her tone light but edged. "Nope, but water's free, so relax." She straightened, brown eyes meeting his, a spark of defiance cutting through the dim. James opened his mouth, words primed to snap, but nothing came. He sat back, wiping his shoes with his hand, anger mixing with a flicker of something else. Disbelief, maybe. She'd stunned him, this soaked stranger who didn't bow. Sophie turned away, hiding a grin, a small win in this wretched night. The storm raged harder, rain pounding like fists, the oil lamp's flame teetering on the edge of death. James checked his watch, dead too, and sighed, leaning back, try to carve out space in this mess. Sophie sank to the floor again, hugging her knees, her gaze drifting to the flickering light. The silence stretched, heavy and reluctant, until James broke it, his voice flat, almost bored. "You've got a son?" She looked up, surprised, brown eyes softening as she nodded. "Noah, he's everything." A faint smile curved her lips, warm despite the chill, lighting her tired face. He didn't reply, just nodded, blue eyes flickering as the name stirred something buried. His own son, lost to fire and betrayal, a memory he'd locked away. Sophie didn't notice, the darkness pulling words from her. "He's a handful. Drew all over Mrs. Clara's walls with crayons once. I apologize for hours. But he's why I keep going." She paused, voice dropping. "One time I couldn't afford milk. Lied and said the store was out. He just grinned and said, 'I like water better, Mom.' Silly, right?" A tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it fast, smiling through it. James stayed silent, his eyes losing their edge, softening at her raw honesty, a kind he hadn't heard in years, not from suits groveling for his favor. Thunder split the sky, the room trembling, and Sophie flinched, clutching her shoulders. James gripped the sofa's armrest, instinct kicking in. The storm's fury stripped their masks. He blurted, voice hoarse, "I had a son once. Couldn't protect him." He stopped, blue eyes darkening, a door creaking open he'd bolted shut long ago. Sophie turned, her gaze gentle, not prying. "I'm sorry," she said, quiet but real. He shook his head, sharp. "Don't. Not your fault." He didn't elaborate, the silence shifting, less cold now, heavier with something shared. The oil lamp sputtered out, plunging them into black. Sophie gasped. "Oh no, where's the light?" She fumbled on the table, searching for matches, her cold fingers brushing James's warm hand. Both jerked back. She stammered, "Sorry, didn't mean to," pulling away fast. He didn't answer, heart thudding, not from anger, but a jolt he couldn't name. In the dark, her silhouette blurred, just a shape across the room. She struck a match, weak light flaring, illuminating her face. Exhausted, resolute, brown eyes steady. She smiled faintly. At least we're alive tonight, right? He nodded, barely, blue eyes peering through the gloom. Inside, a quiet question stirred. Could I feel this again? Her touch, her voice, cracked the ice he'd built, if only a hair. He didn't want to push her away. Not tonight. Not in this storm. Sophie set the match on the table, flame flickering, and sank back, hugging her knees. The rain pounded on, wind howling like a beast, but the room felt smaller, warmer. Two strangers forced close, their walls trembling under the weight of the night. James leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the flame. 5 years of loss had forged him into steel. Money, power, nothing else mattered. But her story, her strength, gnawed at him, a thread he couldn't cut. Sophie glanced over his sharp profile etched in the light, and wondered, who was he beneath the suit? A man who'd lost, like her, but frozen instead of fighting. Thunder rumbled low, the storm easing just a breath, and she spoke, soft but sure. Know it like this, thunder's his superhero sound. James's lips twitched, a ghost of a grin. He sounds tough. She nodded, brown eyes glinting. Tougher than me some days. The match died, darkness swallowing them again, but the tension softened, a fragile bridge forming in the black. They sat in silence, him on the sofa, her on the floor, rain a steady drum, wind a fading growl. Neither moved, neither spoke, but the night had shifted. Fate had locked them here, and something small, unnamed, was starting to thaw. The sun rose slow over the coastal town, pale gold filtering through thinning clouds, painting the rest haven in's weathered walls in soft light. James Sullivan stood at the door, suitcase in hand, his fair skin catching the morning glow, sharp blue eyes fixed ahead. His Armani suit, crumpled, damp with the faint scent of wood, clung to him, a shadow of its former polish. Rain still dripped from the eaves, puddles gleaming on the cracked sidewalk, but the storm had passed, leaving a crisp, washed air. He glanced at his watch, 6 a.m., and stepped out, his stride brisk, cold as ever. Last night was a glitch, a soaked stranger, a flickering lamp, words he hadn't meant to spill. To him, it was done, a ripple he'd smooth over with work. He dialed his driver, climbed into the sleek black Bentley idling nearby, and peeled out without a backward glance. Inside, Sophie Harper lingered, her warm brown skin warmed by the sunlight spilling through the window. Her dark curls hung loose, tangled from the night, faded jeans streaked with floor dust. She zipped her worn backpack, thin jacket slung over her arm, still damp, useless. The room felt bigger now, less suffocating, the frayed blanket on the bed untouched, sofa creaking faintly where James had sat. She exhaled, shoulders easing as she stepped outside, breathing the fresh post-storm air. Noah was safe with Mrs. Clara. She'd called again at dawn, his giggle cutting through the static. The night had been a mess, spilled water, his icy growl, her own voice breaking in the dark. But it was over. She caught the last bus home, relief washing over her, James's sharp blue eyes fading fast from her mind. A month later, James sat in Sullivan Ventures' London office, glass walls framing the city's gleaming sprawl. His dark gray suit, fresh now, tailored sharp, hugged him, tie knotted tight, fair skin shadowed by stubble under the fluorescent hum. His blue eyes scanned financial reports on a widescreen, a low-cost housing project in that same coastal town, moving fast. He'd greenlit it for profit, not sentiment, and decided to check it himself, ensuring every detail was flawless for the shareholders. He boarded his private jet, landing at the patched-up local airport, the storm scars still etched in cracked concrete and bent signs. Across town, Sophie stepped into a prefab office, a stack of papers under her arm, her warm brown skin catching the dusty light streaming through a smudged window. Her white shirt, wrinkled from a morning at the coffee shop, tucked into faded jeans, sneakers scuffed from running between jobs. She'd taken this part-time gig at the construction company behind the housing project, typing reports, filing invoices, extra cash for rent for Noah. She smiled at a coworker, voice light despite the grind. Busy day, huh? She didn't know Sullivan Ventures owned it, didn't care, just another paycheck to keep them afloat. The meeting unfolded in a stark room. Long wooden table, plastic chairs creaking under nervous staff. James strode in, suit crisp, his presence a cold gust, blue eyes slicing through the space. He sat at the head, voice ringing out, low and commanding. Progress updates. Now, the local team stammered through stats, heads bowed, avoiding his gaze. Sophie slipped in late, papers clutched tight, dark curls tied back in a messy bun. She didn't look up, focused on the table, setting the stack down with a soft thud. Here's this week's expense report. Take it if you need it. Her voice was calm, threaded with fatigue. James's head snapped up, blue eyes widening for a split second before icing over. Sophie Harper, water on his shoes, stories in the dark, stood there, shirt creased, sneakers worn, brown eyes oblivious to him. He cleared his throat, masking the jolt. "What are you doing here?" She glanced over, recognition hitting slow, then smirked, light but sharp. "Guess I can't escape you, huh? Working, obviously." "You," her tone teased, a faint sarcasm silencing the room. A few staff swapped puzzled looks. He gritted his teeth, voice steady. "This is my project. I'm the investor." Sophie blinked, then laughed, bright, unfiltered. "Good for you. Don't expect me to bow just because you're the big shot." She turned back to her papers, unfazed, leaving him bristling. The meeting dragged on, tension thick, but the Real spark hit when small footsteps pattered at the door. "Mom!" Noah burst in, backpack crooked, his warm brown skin flushed from running, jacket threadbare. His brown eyes, Sophie's eyes, sparkled as he darted to her, grinning wide, one tooth missing. "School, let out early." Sophie grabbed him, voice soft but firm. "Don't run in here, sweetie." Then he zeroed in on James, pointing with a giggle. "Cool uncle. Do you have a superhero car?" James stiffened, blue eyes flickering. Kids were a ghost he'd buried, a wound he didn't touch. Sophie tugged Noah back. "Don't bother him, okay? Sorry, he's early today." Noah wriggled free, inching closer, dirt smudged on his cheeks. "Are you a superhero? Can you fight monsters?" James opened his mouth to snap, but that grin, innocent bright, stopped him cold. His lips twitched, a faint smile breaking through, rare and small. "He's lively," he said, voice dry, stepping back. Noah giggled, clutching Sophie's hand. "I like you. You're cooler than my teacher." Sophie pulled him outside, whispering, "Don't pester him, he's a big shot." But as she glanced back, James's blue eyes lingered, a flicker of something soft cutting through the ice. Days rolled by, and James returned to the site more than he'd planned. Meetings, inspections, excuses he fed himself. Each time, Noah was there, post-school chaos trailing Sophie, his questions relentless. "Do you have a superhero car? Which one's your favorite?" James brushed him off, voice curt. "I don't have time for kids." But Noah didn't care, tugging his sleeve once, pleading, "Play with me, just once." Sophie frowned, apologetic. "I'll stop him bothering you." James shook his head, blue eyes steady. "It's fine." One afternoon, Noah dropped James's pen, doodling on his hand with a grin. James almost snapped, but that gap-toothed smile held him back. "You're cooler when you smile," Noah said, giggling. James picked up the pen, silent, a crack forming in his steel. Sophie watched from across the room, papers in hand, her brown eyes torn. He was different with Noah, softer, but she didn't trust it. Not yet. James stood, brushing off his suit, and walked out, but his gaze lingered, a pull he didn't name, tying him to them, to this dusty town he'd meant to leave behind. Dust swirled in the prefab office of the housing project, faint sunlight streaming through a cracked window, casting long shadows over the wooden table piled with reports. James Sullivan stood near the desk, his fair skin dusted with the day's grit, sharp blue eyes scanning a contract. His dark gray suit, still sharp, though creased from travel, fit him like a second skin, tie loosened slightly, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. Nearly 2 weeks had passed since he'd locked eyes with Sophie Harper again, since Noah's gap-toothed grin had barreled into his life. He'd been back to this coastal town too often, more than Sullivan Ventures demanded, more than he'd admit. He told himself it was work, reputation control. But deep down, something else tugged. Her resilience, the kid's laugh, cracks in the ice he'd built over 5 years of loss. Sophie stepped in, her warm brown skin catching the light, dark curls tied back loose, a stack of files under her arm. Her white shirt, wrinkled from a morning pouring coffee, tucked into faded jeans, sneakers scuffing the floor. She moved quick, setting the files down with a soft thud, voice light but tired. Latest invoices, don't lose him. She didn't look at James, focused on the task, but the room shifted when a murmur rippled from the doorway. A middle-aged guy, greasy hair slicked back, coffee cup in hand, sauntered by, tossing a sleazy grin her way. "Hey, Harper, free tonight? I'll buy dinner. Just ditch the little brat, huh?" His voice dripped oil, eyes raking over her. Sophie froze, clutching the table's edge, her brown eyes icing over. "Thanks, but I'm not free. And don't call my son a brat." Her tone cut sharp, steady despite the sting. The guy snickered undeterred. "Come on, single mom like you. Grab a chance when you can." Before she could fire back, James stepped forward, his presence a cold blade slicing through the hum. "Get out," he said, voice low, lethal, blue eyes blazing. The man spun, mouth opening to argue, but James's stare, frigid, unyielding, shut him down. I was kidding, Mr. Sullivan," he stammered, shrinking. James didn't blink. "Joke again, and you're gone. Leave." The guy scurried off, coffee sloshing, leaving silence in his wake. Sophie turned, frowning, brown eyes narrowing. "I could have handled it. You didn't need to jump in." James shrugged, turning back to the desk, his tone curt. "I don't like dead weight, slowing things down." He didn't meet her gaze, but his lips twitched, a faint, hidden spark. She huffed, stacking papers, unsure what to make of him. This icy stepping in her mess, unasked. Days rolled on, and he noticed more, her shadowed eyes from late shifts, her voice trembling on a call with her landlord. "I'll pay next week, I swear. Please don't kick us out." He said nothing, but the next morning, he wired 3 months' rent through an assistant. No trace back to him. When Sophie found out, via a gushing letter from the landlord, she stormed into the office, papers spilling as she slammed the note on his desk. "What the hell did you do?" Her brown eyes blazed, voice shaking with fury. James looked up, mid-signature, his fair skin calm under the fluorescent buzz. "I don't know what you're talking about." She jabbed the letter. "Don't play dumb. You pay my rent. I don't need your pity." He set the pen down, blue eyes steady. "Not pity. I don't want my staff distracted by petty crap." Her jaw tightened. "I'm not your employee, and I don't need handouts. I manage fine." She spun to leave, but he called after her, voice low. "You're stubborn as hell, Harper." She didn't turn back, storming out, heart torn between anger and a flicker of something softer. The real shift came on a rainy night, cold drops pelting the coastal town. Sophie huddled in her run-down apartment, walls thin, heat weak, cradling Noah on a sagging couch. His warm brown skin flushed hot, breath ragged, a fever spiking fast. She rummaged for medicine, finding only expired pills, panic clawing her chest. "Hang on, baby, mommy's got you," she whispered, tears streaking her face as she dialed for a taxi. No one answered, storm too fierce. Her phone buzzed, a strange number, and she picked up, voice shaky. "Hello." James's voice cut through, urgent, raw. "Where are you?" She froze. "Why are you calling?" He repeated, sharper, "Where are you?" Stammering, she gave the address, and 15 minutes later, headlights pierced the rain, a Bentley skidding to a stop. James burst out, long coat drenched, no umbrella, pounding her door. She opened it, and he scooped Noah up without a word, his blue eyes locked ahead. "Get in the car." Sophie didn't argue, rushing after him, rain soaking her sweater as he gunned it to the hospital, windshield wipers slashing the blur. He carried Noah into the ER, barking at nurses, "Do something now." Sophie stood nearby, hands trembling, watching, gratitude and shock tangling as the doctor hooked Noah to and for, promising he'd be fine by morning. James didn't leave. He sank into a plastic chair, leather shoes soaked, blue eyes fixed on Noah's small form. Tubes, beeps, a scene he'd buried deep. Sophie sat by the bed, holding Noah's hand, stealing glances at him. This man who'd raced through a storm, no questions, no ice. Late that night, Noah stirred, voice faint. "Mom, I'm thirsty." James fumbled to his feet, grabbing a cup, spilling half before handing it over. Noah giggled weakly. "Cool uncle's bad at this." James frowned, blue eyes softening. "I'm not used to it, kid." Noah grinned. "Tell me a story?" James hesitated, then sat, voice awkward but earnest. "Once upon a time, there was a superhero with a fire sword." Sophie watched, brown eyes wide, a smile breaking through as he stumbled through the tale, staying till Noah drifted off. At dawn, he stood to go, but she called, voice soft, "Thank you, James." He turned, blue eyes gruff but warm. "Don't thank me. Didn't want the kid slowing you down." He left, rain easing outside, but inside him, something burned. Her Noah, a warmth he couldn't shake. Days later, he showed up at a muddy soccer field near her place, coat damp, watching Noah kick a ball. "Cool uncle, teach me," the boy shouted, grinning. James sighed, fumbling a kick, tumbling into the grass. Sophie laughed, bright, real, nearby. "You're worse than him." He smirked, brushing dirt off his suit, blue eyes glinting. "Better at money than soccer." Noah giggled, clutching his stomach, and James laughed, open, unguarded, a sound he hadn't heard in years. Sophie's heart skipped, watching this man, once cold, now here, tangled in their mess. The ice was cracking, and she felt it too, a pull she didn't name, binding them tighter in the quiet. Dusk settled over the coastal town, a faint drizzle streaking the air, pooling in shallow dips along the dirt road. James Sullivan sat in his Bentley, parked under a flickering street lamp, his fair skin shadowed by the dim glow filtering through the windshield. His long black coat, damp from a quick dash outside, lay across the passenger seat, his dark gray suit creased from a day at the project site. Sharp blue eyes stared ahead, fixed on Sophie Harper's small apartment, its yellow light spilling soft through a cracked window. 3 weeks had passed since he'd raced Noah to the hospital, since he'd tumbled in the mud with the kid, Sophie's laugh echoing in his ears. Those moments, simple, warm, had slipped under his skin, melting the ice he'd carried for 5 years. But tonight, watching her silhouette cradle Noah on the balcony, something else surged. Fear. He loved her. Not a fleeting spark, but a deep, aching pull. Her resilience, her brown eyes blazing when she'd refused his rent money, Noah's grin calling him cool uncle. It hit him hard, heart pounding every time she was near. But with it came terror, memories of his wife and son, lost to a car bomb in a ruthless power play, crashed back vivid and raw. Their laughter, her touch, then the explosion's roar. He'd failed them, and the thought of failing Sophie and Noah shredded him. His hands gripped the wheel, knuckles pale, breath fogging the glass. Am I enough? Will I lose them too? He gunned the engine, peeling into the dark, trying to bury it, but the fear clung like damp air. Inside, Sophie sat on a worn armchair, her warm brown skin warmed by the lamp's faint glow, dark curls loose over her faded sweater. Noah played nearby, rolling a toy car James had given him, a sleek black Bentley replica. Across the floor, his brown eyes dimmer than usual. She smiled, faint and forced, stitching a tear in his jacket, but her mind churned. James had changed, shielding her from that creep, staying up with Noah in the ER, laughing in the mud. He wasn't the cold suit from the storm anymore, but doubt gnawed at her. Did he see her as a fix for his past? Would he bolt, leaving Noah heartbroken? She'd trusted once, lost Noah's dad to a crash when she was pregnant, and every shattered hope had carved a piece of her away. She hugged Noah as he yawned, whispering, "Mommy won't let you get hurt," but her voice trembled, unsure. The tension snapped one rainy evening when James appeared at her door, coat soaked, no umbrella, his fair skin glistening wet. His blue eyes flickered, conflicted, unsteady, a crack in his usual steel. Sophie opened the door, sweater sleeves pushed up, brown eyes wary. "I need to talk," he said, voice low, trembling just enough to catch her off guard. She nodded, letting him in, the apartment quiet save for the rain's steady patter. Noah asleep in the next room. James stood in the living room, hands in his pockets, coat dripping onto the worn rug. He looked at her, gaze deep, raw. "I love you, Sophie." The words dropped heavy, unpolished, like a stone breaking the silence. She froze, brown eyes widening, heart slamming against her ribs. Before she could speak, he pushed on, voice hoarse. "But I can't risk it. I can't let you and Noah in, only to lose you like before." Her shock flared into anger, hands gripping the chair's armrest. "What are you saying?" she demanded, voice rising sharp. He looked away, blue eyes haunted. "I lost my family once, my wife, my son, because I wasn't enough. If I let myself love you, if Noah keeps calling me uncle, and I fail again, I won't make it." His breath hitched, the weight of it spilling out. Sophie stepped closer, brown eyes blazing, fury and pain tangling. "Don't decide for me and Noah. Who the hell are you to choose our lives?" Her voice shook, fists clenched. "You're scared of losing US. Did you think about how we feel? You show up, make Noah smile, make me believe you're different, then pull this? That's selfish, James." He spun back, blue eyes flashing, voice cracking loud. "Selfish? I'm protecting you. I don't want you tied to a guy like me. Someone who only knows money, who let his family die." The confession broke, raw and jagged, the first time he'd let spill. She didn't flinch, stepping into his space, rain drumming harder outside. "You're not protecting me. You're running. Be scared, fine, but don't use your past to push us away." Her tears welled, voice fierce. The fight erupted, a storm of its own. James slammed his fist against the wall, a thud rattling the room. "You don't get it. I can't lose anyone else." Sophie shouted back, pointing at the door, tears streaming. "Then go. Don't hurt Noah by giving him hope if you won't stay." He stared, breathing hard, blue eyes locked on her, fury, fear, longing clashing, then turned, slamming the door behind him, rain swallowing his steps. He drove off, coat drenched, hands shaking on the wheel, determined to cut it clean, to shield them, or himself from the pain. Back in London, he sank into Sullivan Ventures' glass tower, meetings and contracts piling up, whiskey glass in hand each night. Sleep dodged him. Noah's laugh, Sophie's voice calling him selfish, haunted the silence. He stared at a photo, the only one he kept, his son beaming, and for the first time in years, tears burned his eyes, spilling quiet. He'd chosen this, but it ached worse than he'd imagined. Sophie stayed strong for Noah, her warm brown skin shadowed by sleepless nights, dark curls pulled back as she worked. Coffee shop, project office, repeat. She smiled for him, but it was hollow. Noah stopped asking about cool uncle every day, clutching the toy car tighter, his brown eyes tinged with a sadness she couldn't fix. One night, he murmured, "I want Uncle to tell me superhero stories again," and she pulled him close, tears falling silent. She blamed herself, letting him hope, letting James in, wondering if she'd misjudged it all. Miles apart, they carried their wounds, bound by memories they couldn't shake, the past a wall neither dared to breach. Not yet. London's lights glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Sullivan Ventures' boardroom, a cold, dazzling sprawl under a gray sky. James Sullivan stood at the glass, his fair skin shadowed by stubble, sharp blue eyes staring into the void. His dark gray suit hung crisp, tie knotted tight, but his hands trembled faintly, gripping a Mont Blanc pen he hadn't used. 2 weeks had passed since he'd walked out of Sophie Harper's apartment, rain-soaked and torn, vowing to cut her and Noah loose. He'd drowned himself in work, Contract signed, deal struck, a machine grinding on, but the emptiness gnawed deeper. Every night, Noah's gap-toothed grin flickered in his mind. Sophie's voice, "You're so selfish," ringing loud. Money couldn't fill this hole. It never had. He dropped the pen, stepping onto the balcony, wind whipping cold, and knew he needed them, not power. Hundreds of miles away, Sophie sat in her coastal apartment, the faint glow of a lamp warming her warm brown skin, dark curls spilling over a faded sweater. She stitched Noah's torn jacket, needle flashing in the dim, while he rolled his toy Bentley across the floor nearby, his brown eyes duller than they'd been. 2 weeks without James. Sophie forced smiles for Noah, worked her shifts, but each night, alone, tears fell quiet. Noah hadn't asked about cool Uncle much, but his silence hurt more. The toy car clutched tight like a lifeline. One evening, he looked up, voice small. "Where's Uncle James, Mom? Doesn't he like me anymore?" Her hands froze, the jacket slipping, heart squeezing. "It's not that, honey. He's busy," she whispered, tears spilling as she hugged him, unable to answer fully. The breaking point hit on a pale, sunny day. Sophie stood in the apartment, her warm brown skin tense, hands shaking as the landlord pounded the door. "Pay up by Friday, Harper, or you're out. No more chances." Her voice cracked, pleading, "I'll get it, just a few days." But the woman stormed off, unyielding. Jobs weren't enough. Savings gone. Panic clawed her chest. That afternoon, Noah rode his bike outside, drawing a superhero picture to cheer her, his brown eyes focused. He didn't see the delivery truck rolling slow. Sophie screamed, "Noah," as he fell, head striking pavement, blood streaking his forehead. She ran, cradling him, sobbing, "Call an ambulance." Neighbors dialed, sirens wailed, rushing him to the hospital. A mild concussion, the doctor said, but overnight watch needed. Sophie sat by Noah's bed, her sweater stained red, brown eyes red-rimmed, holding his hand as he slept. He woke at dawn, voice faint. "Mom, it hurts." She stroked his hair, whispering, "I'm here, you'll be okay." Then he murmured, "Where's Uncle James? I want him." And her throat closed, tears falling. She grabbed her phone, fingers hovering over James's number. Pride screamed no, but Noah's plea broke her. In London, James sat in his office, blue eyes heavy, scrolling to Sophie's contact, gut twisting. He pressed call just as her phone rang. Her voice came through, trembling. "James, is that you?" He straightened, heart racing. "Are you okay?" She sobbed. "Noah." He fell off his bike. "He's in the hospital, asking for you." Noah's faint voice carried over. "Where's Uncle James?" Piercing James like a blade. "I'm coming," he said, voice ragged, hanging up. He bolted, keys in hand, leaping into the Bentley, speeding through sunlight to the coastal town. No rain this time, just urgency burning in his chest. He hit the hospital by noon, striding in, suit rumpled, hair wild, blue eyes blazing. Sophie looked up from Noah's bedside, her warm brown skin pale with exhaustion, brown eyes wide. "Why are you here?" He stepped forward, kneeling, taking her hand, his voice low, firm. "I can't live without you and Noah. I was wrong. Thought leaving would protect you, but I can't stand it. I need you, Sophie. I need him, if you'll let me." She cried, voice choking. "Are you sure? You walked away once." He squeezed her hand, blue eyes steady. "Surer than anything. I love you. I want this life with you both." Noah stirred, brown eyes hazy but brightening. "Cool, Uncle." James smiled, sitting beside him, fair skin warm in the sterile light. "I'm here, kid. Not going anywhere." Noah grinned, weak but real, gripping his hand. "Tell me a superhero story." James nodded, voice clumsy but earnest. "Once there was a hero who fought with a fire sword." Sophie watched, tears of hope falling, nodding soft. "Okay, let's start over." Weeks later, drizzle tapped the awning of their new apartment, a cozy place James had bought, letting Sophie pay him back slow, despite her grumbling. He stood in the yard, long coat damp, fixing Noah's broken umbrella, stitches crooked, a CEO fumbling for a kid's smile. Noah darted around, his warm brown skin muddy, oversized jacket flapping, splashing puddles. "Cool, uncle. Be a flying superhero," he cheered. James frowned, humor glinting in his blue eyes. "I don't fly, Noah, but here's your umbrella." He handed it over, laughing as Noah hugged him tight, arms around his neck. Sophie stepped out, gray sweater soft against her warm brown skin, a towel in hand, pausing under the awning. She smiled, warm, real, watching them, still adjusting to James here, soaked and grinning. "You don't need to be out there. It's getting heavy," she said, voice gentle. He turned, blue eyes locking on hers, rain dripping from his hair. "I want to be here, with you, with Noah. I promised." He stepped closer, then knelt in the mud, heedless of his suit, voice hoarse. "I'm sorry, Sophie, for running, for letting fear hurt you both. I'm not good with words, but I want forever, not to fix the past, but because I love you." Her tears mingled with the rain, brown eyes soft, forgiving. "Okay, James, we'll start over." Noah dashed up, hugging James from behind, laughing. "You're staying forever. Superhero stories every day." James pulled him close, grinning wide, unguarded, warm, then drew Sophie in, arms wrapping them both. Rain soaked through, but he kissed her, gentle, fierce, cold drops warm between their lips. She kissed back, arms tight around him, and Noah, doubt dissolving in their heat. They stood, a muddy trio under the gray sky, whole at last. James, once ice, now alive. Sophie, resilient, trusting again. Noah, their spark, laughing free. Rain streaked the coastal town as James Sullivan knelt in the mud, his fair skin wet, blue eyes locked on Sophie Harper. Her warm brown skin glowed under the awning, dark curls damp, holding Noah close. His small arms wrapped them both, toy Bentley clutched tight, their laughter cutting through the drizzle. From a storm-trapped night to this, James shed his ice, Sophie her doubt, forging a family in the wet, messy now. The city faded behind. This was home, raw and real. James and Sophie prove it. Love can spark in a storm, grow through fear, and heal old scars. It's not about wealth or strength. It's choosing to stay, to fight for what matters. One kind act, one honest word can rewrite your story. Don't run from the rain. Embrace it. You might find your forever where you least expect.